One of the interesting, striking characteristics about insurance in Japan is that there is highly limited penetration of insurance for natural catastrophes, including earthquake and tsunami. Coverage is neither compulsory nor is it automatic. The greatest penetration is for bank-financed mortgages, but if you look at the some personal lines of dwellings insurance, the take-up of tsunami and earthquake insurance is something less than 20%. Commercial and industrial risks are normally incompletely insured, and if you permit me to illustrate, as an example, if you have a factory that is, or a commercial premise worth $1 million, let's say, you might buy a normal property insurance policy, maybe some boiler machinery, and that would look pretty much like an American policy or a British policy. But when it came to natural catastrophe, you would then see the policy, the buyer would buy different conditions. For $1 million plant, hypothetically, but close enough to the truth, the deductible for earthquake and tsunami and windstorm might be as much as $200,000, and the insurance purchase would be an additional $200,000, part of the remaining $800,000, which means that after you swallow the $200,000 loss, you then were recompensed $1 for every $4 of loss greater than $200,000. So that's what I mean by incomplete insurance, and that's a simple example, but that's pretty much what it looks like. So you have high deductibles and significant co-insurance. Vehicles generally are not insured against tsunami and earthquake. So those horrific pictures of cars being swept away, or pictures of cars at the bottom of rifts in the earth, highly likely that those assets are not insured. Now, when we get in the marine area, just because of the nature of marine insurance, the coverage tends to be more present. Lloyd's made an initial and admittedly very rough guess that the hull losses from this would run at least $300 million. There were a couple of large Pacific freight vessels which were caught in the tsunami, and of course we've seen pictures of all those fishing vessels, many of which, but not all, were insured. And that's whether it's a tsunami or an earthquake, it's a hull loss. The hull's either floating or it's not. In the energy area, the insurance coverage is pretty similar to industrial. Again, high deductibles and co-insurance rather than full insurance above the deductible. So it's an unusual, it's a surprising practice in the way that insurance is purchased. Reinsurance considerations, when we get there we go. Reinsurance considerations seem to follow a highly similar pattern. For personal lines dwelling risks, there is a government scheme, with apologies to the person from Rhode Island for using the word. There's a government scheme whereby all of the dwelling risks with earthquake and tsunami and wind insurance that are written by the joint stock companies are thrown into a pool. And that pool is shared among the joint stock companies, and it is reinsured by the joint stock companies and by the government. This pool has got $67 billion or so of claims-paying resource, and the government's participation in losses to the pool starts at around $1.5 billion and increases as the level of loss grows. Now, not all dwellings or personal lines risks are insured by the joint stock non-life companies. There are mutual companies. One of the largest in the world is in Japan, Zenkyoren. They are entirely outside of this government scheme. They buy excess of loss reinsurance in the world market. One of the largest excess of loss programs in the world is Zenkyoren's. These These programs, however, feature substantial attachment points or substantial deductibles. And again, it's worth repeating, not the earthquake and tsunami cover are not automatic and not compulsory. So just because NCUR is insuring a house doesn't mean that it's covering a house or a condominium, doesn't mean that it's covering earthquake and tsunami damage to the property. Commercial and industrial risks are reinsured in a way that's similar to, is common to other countries' practices. There's pro rata and excess of loss risk excess. Only difference that yet again the Japanese companies retain substantial amounts of the risk. Life insurance in Japan follows a similar pattern. First of all, market penetration outside of the center of the island of Honshu, that's outside of the stretch between Tokyo and Kobe, falls off dramatically. In an area like Tohoku, you would expect to see much less penetration than you would in the center of Japan for both personal accident and for life. And again, the Japanese life companies have the buy excess of loss cover to protect them from catastrophes, but again, the deductibles or attachment points are extremely high. Japan has an atomic energy pool, and then that's mixed by the coverage is provided by a mixture of the government and the companies. There's no cover for earthquake or tsunami. There is liability cover. However, there's a requirement for liability cover, and the pool provides liability insurance up to the first 120 billion yen. That may be waived in the event of a grave natural disaster, and those of you who follow this a bit know that I'm missing some words here, of unusual character, so it's a grave natural catastrophe, a natural disaster of unusual character. Everyone in Japan agrees that this is a grave natural disaster. Not everyone agrees that it is of unusual character. Earthquakes and tsunamis are actually fairly common in Japan. See that the coverage of Fukushima number 1 is at the bare minimum. Japanese insurance and reinsurance thought process is hallmarked by significant national retention of risk, and we've seen all these examples. The deductible on our attachment point of the Zenkyurin cover is about 3.3 billion. The Zenkyurin was informally advising reinsurers of estimated modeled losses of something like 5.8 billion. If that's the case, the deductible deductible covers more than half of the loss. This issue of retaining risk just dominates the way that the natural catastrophe risk is handled in Japan. The economic loss of the Kobe earthquake was around $100 billion. The insured loss was around $3 billion. The loss to the world reinsurance market was not small, but it was small enough that it has in fact slipped from memory. We compare this to the earthquake in Christchurch, New Zealand. The insured loss was estimated to be about $10 billion, and that was 75% of the loss. The reinsurance community is picking up approximately 50% of that loss, and there's some discussion as to whether the loss will increase or not. If it increases, the bulk of that increase will be picked up by the international reinsurance community. If we look at Katrina, loss there's different ways of counting up the loss, but again, the reinsurance community picked up something on the order of 50% of that. These numbers put the Japanese the Japanese risk management approach into focus. They are they retain even these catastrophic risks. Japan has pioneered just-in-time logistics. Well, if you don't have the transport and to move goods, and you don't have the power to manufacture goods, you can't deliver them just in time. So that has led the automobile manufacturers and other heavy machinery manufacturers in the central portions of Honshu to reduce or suspend operations entirely. And in fact, most of the automobile manufacturers have ceased production. That also affects companies outside of Japan. You may have heard on the news today that Toyota has asked its dealers not to request certain spare parts because they're just not available. And there's also certain production processes, which are essentially continuous process, and the disruption of power makes it difficult to continue with those processes that include sensitive items such as silicone chips.